Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's State of Freight webinar. My name's Julia Becker. I am the Vice President of Media Operations here at FreightWaves, and I'll be your host for today. I'm joined in the studio by our founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, and Head of Freight Market Intelligence, Zach Strickland. Today's conversation will cover the latest insights from SONAR, current market trends, and an analysis from our experts. Craig and Zach will also answer your questions live following our discussion today. But before we get started, I want to cover just a couple of quick items. First, if you have questions during our webinar, you can submit those to Craig and Zach via that Q&A box in your platform at any point during the conversation today. We'll save time at the end for those questions. If you have any issues, you can reach out to me via that audience chat function, and I'll be in touch to assist you. We'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow in case you want to watch it on demand or use the slides as a resource. I'll go ahead and kick it over to Zach to jump into today's discussion.
And thank you for that, Julia. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today. So we're going to spice things up a little bit this day. You know, it's the summer. It's time for fun. Everybody's about to go on vacation for a month in July. So we thought we'd have a little fun. Start off by having a little game.
I like
Fuller.
games.
And what I'm gonna do, now we've got a couple of new features in SONAR, so this is gonna kind of play into that a little bit, but we've added this seasonality feature to lane rates inside of SONAR. And you know, Craig, you're a freight guy.
I'm a freight guy. I grew up in it. Yeah.
You've grown up in freight. I've priced freight for a long time. We're gonna play a game where we guess that seasonality. So I'm going to bring up a few lane rates and a handful of them, and I'm going to ask you when is the seasonal peak of each of these lanes? And you can give me as granular of a response as you want. If you need to be general, we have general like quarters where things peak out, but we also have months. There's very specific weeks.
You're Pat Sajak to tell me if I get this right?
So play along at home or in your office, especially some of my broker friends out there. They'll probably have some strong thoughts here, but we're gonna go through a series of lanes to start this thing off, and then we'll get into some of the freight market dynamics. We still have this ongoing trade war situation along with some capacity questions, and then this crazy, uncertain economic environment that we'll get into here in a little bit. But first off, Craig Fuller. Let's name that seasonality with the first lane here is going to be Los Angeles to Dallas.
I'm going to say the typical seasonality would be early January. And then, so it has like two different seasons. It has early January and then bifurcated really in the summer all the way up to about September.
Okay, so you're saying a seasonal peak of January?
Well, I'm saying it follows through in the past. So you have this overhang from the fourth quarter that continues into January
and
largely because of the Chinese New Year freight that keeps flowing in.
But you're saying the fourth quarter is the peak?
Fourth quarter's peak, but it like indexes into January as well.
Okay.
Because of the...
Well, there it is right there. So
because of the Chinese New Year freight, you typically see LA actually continue to peak all the way until the end of January.
All right, I'm gonna give you mostly credit.
Oh, come on. That's what the chart says.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
sort of.
January this year was certainly what we would consider peak. Now, for those of you that are watching this, the white line there with the mountain is the current year. 2023 is sitting there in the pink, and 2024 is in the teal line. Fourth quarter for sure. I think that's without doubt. I'll give you most of that, but we haven't really had a strong January, but I see what you're saying. We've got a little bit of a trend line that
it drops in that February to May time frame.
But January out of Los Angeles is terrible. I don't want to.
All right, we'll go to the next one. But it's on a spot rate basis.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, if you're talking contract and certainly.
Well, we're talking spot rates, right?
Yeah, we're talking spot rates. These are spot rates, by the way. All right, let's go to the next one. So the next one is going to be Atlanta to Harrisburg, or Philadelphia, if you want to call it that.
Atlanta to Harrisburg.
Atlanta to Harrisburg. This is one of my favorite lanes.
I think it's going to be summer peak. Drop off in the third quarter.
I mean, because you got the Atlanta market.
I think it's summer peak. I think it really starts to head up in May.
Head haul lane.
Go all the way to Memorial Day to Labor Day.
All right, let's see what we got here. We got a woo.
There you go.
There it is.
See, I get that. That one is 100%
Summer?
undisputed right
All
there.
right. No, I'll definitely give you this one. So that one, this one is pretty much of a layup to me.
Oh, come
I
on.
mean,
You can't even like dismiss my comments there.
No, certainly Atlanta, of course, big, much more active in the warmer months and going into a backhaul up there in the Northeast. And I mean, it's interesting to me that we've had this. I mean, this was a stronger peak this year. In
Yeah, but
June.
Atlanta did well. If you remember
Yeah.
back in May, it was
had
it was peaking. A lot of that was Savannah was actually quite strong. Remember there was
Stronger peak.
that period of time where there was
Yeah.
like just not enough trucks in Savannah.
Yeah. And of
Atlanta was
course-
hot, man.
And
It is
Atlanta,
hot.
of course, is connected to Savannah.
Yep.
So any kind
The
of East Coast.
Southeast was doing quite
Yep.
well. It was cooking.
Yep. So for those of you shipping in this lane, of course, expect elevated rates and potential stuff into August, and then maybe it'll fall off.
All right.
We'll see. All right, next one here. Let's go. I don't want to pull this up too quick. I keep giving you the answer. Seattle
Yep.
to Los Angeles.
Oh, this one's easy. This would be a
Layup.
October, November,
Layup.
and
Should be
really to about Thanksgiving.
Let's see what we got here. Yep, that's about right. And you know what's
Yeah,
surprising?
some weird springness going on. Is that just container port
Well,
stuff?
you know, I think a lot of the stuff up here, you've got some produce involvement.
Well,
up
that
in
must be
Northwest.
the big pink line is the apple orchard season.
Yeah, you got some potatoes and apples and stuff that kind
End
of
of
get
the year.
delayed.
You also have like Christmas tree,
Christmas tree.
wrapping, paper.
which of course goes on the refrigerated stuff mostly, but it does have an influence.
Well,
on
Christmas
capacity.
tree wrap. Remember, wrapping paper is a huge piece of that business up there.
But yeah, I mean that's Christmas. But anyway, yeah, I'll give you that one. That's a pretty straightforward. All right, let's get back to our Midwest roots here with freight, where things really tend to have a nice seasonality to them. Chicago to Harrisburg.
Chicago to Harrisburg.
Chicago
This
to-
one's an interesting one. I'm going to have to say third quarter is when it peaks.
Third quarter, okay, a little off-centered quarter. Not a lot of ton going on. Let's see what we got.
I mean, you got the one big hit. It is.
You know
it
what?
like scams into the deal. Look at that's technically a peak in third quarter.
I think we got a fourth quarter here.
That's a third quarter. Look at it peaking. Okay, you asked for peak. I guess you would right if
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
talking the peak.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got-
I
You got a
will
July 4th
concede.
thing.
I will
but
concede. You actually have some overflow in there.
You know
Look
what's
at the
interesting
first-
here,
first-
though,
first
and
quarter.
I think technically we should call it first quarter.
That's what I'm seeing as well.
Um,
But I think a lot of that freight is stuff that was left in inventory for the holiday season.
You know what it is? It's winter weather. It's,
Is that the
we've had 2 consecutive years of pretty strong winter weather.
so
events.
high spot rates in January?
Yeah, so which is causing an off-centered seasonality, which I would have said this is a fourth quarter market, but over the last bit, we've got a first quarter.
By the way, I love these seasonal charts.
Yeah.
This is one of the coolest features inside of SONAR right now.
What I like about it is that like we all have these preconceived notions. I've
Where
priced
does
freight.
rates peak?
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing is you can forecast out to a future date because you can see where the lines. I mean, these do. What's interesting is how closely correlated these are every single year, or at least have been the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is.
They're tight. They're tight historical bands.
I found these lanes checking my own biases, by the way. So
Okay.
it was.
I'd love to hear which one you were surprised by.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, let's go to the next one. Elizabeth, New Jersey to Dallas.
Ooh.
A nice backhaul.
And this
for it.
is we're doing rate, right?
Yeah, this is rate.
It's got to be Q4.
Q4 backhaul now. All right, we'll stick with it. Let's see
I
what
think I'm
happens.
going to stick with my Q4 number.
Q4 or maybe Q1. But again, we've had some winter weather.
Is it? What do you say? I mean, that one's a little disputed. That's
Yeah.
has a very similar conditions to LA.
Yeah.
Since you didn't give me the LA one,
Yeah.
I would say that.
I mean, this is a
Q4
backhaul
thing,
lane.
right?
There should be less responsiveness.
But look
in
at
the
the
rate.
look at the first quarter overhang where drivers are off,
Yep.
and you see that at the port city, like in LA too.
I mean, this.
You
is,
didn't give me LA because I didn't pick I picked first quarter
Yeah.
a higher. I mean, you could argue that this chart's more definitive on first quarter.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is more definitive. For,
Maybe I get a half point.
Yeah,
I
I'll
get
give
like
it-
I
I'll
like
give you a half
concede. I concede half points on LA.
You know, I wish I could go back to 20. What was the before times? Before we had
Before
this-
COVID?
Before COVID, before kind of the 2017-18 environment.
Yeah.
Although I would say that we still had seasonality in the traditional sense in 18, just exacerbated. But since COVID, we've had some stuff here. But this is
All right, what do we got? What's next?
Let's go next with Houston. Houston to Dallas. So a little short haul.
Short haul.
Little short haul.
It's gotta be-
Houston's a wild market.
It
to
is a
me.
wild market, and it's become more so because
Yeah.
the amount, this was like a month ago when I was looking at the market share data. It's the number one market in the country. And like,
Yeah.
it went from like number 8.
Huge.
I think when we started SONAR, it was like number 8.
Is a huge
But
growth
Houston, I think a lot of that is energy. So I'm actually going to bet on energy here.
Okay.
And I'm going to say that it's actually, this is my bet, is it's far more volatile of a lane and inconsistent than the rest of the charts.
Okay. Do you have a peak?
I would say late summer.
Okay.
I'll take the August, and only because of produce season is in Texas. You get it in southern Texas, produce season. What say you, data?
It says you're right about the volatility.
Well, you have a little bit of, like, that sort of counts.
You've got
Starts in
some
July.
summer,
Is
yeah.
that late summer?
Yeah, you've got it.
Because it's really, you get a beverage season is big
Beverage
in Texas,
season,
and you get
huge.
produce season in the third quarter.
Yeah. This looks more like an early summer peak to me, but you know
All
what?
right.
You were close enough. I'll give this one to you because the Houston market in the summer is definitely.
It is incredibly, look at the volatility of that
the
lane.
volatility
It is
is
very inconsistent in terms of seasonality.
I mean, and this is a very dense lane.
It's become incredibly dense.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it was number 8 when
Yeah.
we started SONAR in 18. It's become the largest market.
a lot of
largest
special
market in the US.
project freight is stuff.
A lot of
coming in.
energy related,
A lot of
and
energy.
a lot of
chemicals.
imports too.
Yep.
Chemicals, petrochemicals are big. Import activity is big. In this late summer, produce in Texas really, this stuff gets going in July and August.
All right. Well, let's go to the next one here. You requested this one. So Minneapolis.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the data. What do you say?
You haven't
Minneapolis to
looked
Dallas?
at it. Minneapolis to Dallas.
So I always remember Minneapolis peaking in September and October.
Okay.
Really around the harvest season. That's in that winter harvest season. That's a little bit later.
Grains.
The grains.
Yeah.
I'm going to say September, October.
September, October. Let's see what the data says. You would be pretty close to right.
I think that is right. That's
yeah.
October?
Yeah.
September, October? Like,
But look at the winter.
that's true.
Look at the winter.
Winter rates, man.
Winter rates. People have dismissed January.
Last couple of years, January.
You and I have talked
You
about
didn't give me LA January, so how, like, fine. I'll concede. I concede you're right. Look at January, man.
January
is cooking.
in the Midwest has been pretty active.
Cooking, freezing.
But I think that you're right. I think that you would have called this correctly had we not had some winter weather stuff. I think this would have been.
I would concede that of the ones that, but that October time frame. I always remember Minneapolis. A lot of that electronic freight comes out of like Best Buy warehouses and stuff up there.
A lot of corporate activity up
And
there.
and it's also the harvest season, which is always a big thing.
The grains, man. They're a big deal. September, October. I think I would have given this one to you, knowing that the winter weather was a big influence the last couple of years. All right, next one. Now, this one fascinates me. Savannah to Columbus.
Oh, here's Savannah, Georgia.
Yep.
Big port city.
Yep.
To Columbus, Ohio. It's got to be tied to retail because Columbus is the mecca center of retail.
Yeah. It's where that. So Savannah,
So
of course.
I'm thinking I
come
need to
in
get freight into it.
that
So
northeastern hub.
I'm thinking summer, get it into back to school. And the reason back to school because you have all those big box retailers, all those apparel retailers that are in Columbus. I'm going to say our peak season is summer, peaking in July, dropping off August, September, and another mini peak in the fourth quarter.
All right, you're definitely right about the summer. Man, look at that.
I think that is 100%.
Yeah.
There's no dispute on that one.
Yeah, May, June for Savannah to Columbus.
I think a lot of that again is the apparel season, back to school.
Yeah,
Because I think that's what drives. If you think about Columbus, Ohio specifically, Columbus is think about who's based there. You have the Limited Brands is based there.
Northeastern
Gap has
hub.
a huge distribution center there. The Columbus is a big commerce town.
All right, I'm going to go in. Okay, last two. Now these are kind of topical markets.
Okay.
So the last two I'm going to pull up here. The first one, of course, we've been talking about this for the last couple of years.
Oh no.
Laredo.
Laredo.
Laredo to Chicago. Now, I tried to pick, because I know this is kind of an automotive-centric lane, but, a lot of that freight going south to north, there's a little bit of influence there. But Laredo, of course, we've been talking about it, cross-border freight. Name that seasonality.
Ooh, I'm going to say it probably looks a little bit more like Houston, a little bit, it's pretty volatile. You mentioned auto, and auto tends to really cook in July. July and August as the retooling season comes in. But also, Laredo's played a major part in retail.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to go fourth quarter.
Fourth quarter?
Peak. What say you, Data?
Oh, man.
It's so volatile. Look at that. It's all over the place. It's hard to call a winner on that.
I don't know if you can call it
cityscape.
a peak, but it certainly
is volatile. I get some points for saying it's all over the place.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That one is like, look at how inconsistent the rate.
Look at the sharp drop off right now.
But look at third quarter. I mean, I guess I got that one wrong because third quarter, you don't have.
Oh, this is definitely a second quarter.
It is
environment.
A little surprising, frankly.
This is a second quarter. We've got a little bit of a.
What do we think's driving? Is it just produce?
Well, March is typically a strong automotive like they kind of switch their
they
lines.
do the July. They do the plants in July.
And then
maybe
that's
the end
kind of
of
how
the-
they start shipping things.
All right. Well, I actually concede that I had no clue.
Yeah, this one was
This
tough.
one is weird.
This one's tough because it's.
I bet Matt Silver
volatile.
knows this one. He'd probably be screaming, this is the telling you to the date. That's all he does. This is like his one thing. It's like one lane.
I mean, this one doesn't look like a functional peak to me. This is a very.
It looks really distressed.
This is the Wild West for sure. All right, last one before we move forward. All right, so Salinas Valley, California, where all of our produce gets
Well,
a
a good
little
portion
lettuce.
of it.
Yeah, a little lettuce.
Dole, didn't you go out there for that? Our friend Ben Thrower?
Ben Thrower did.
Yeah,
Ben Thrower did.
okay,
Yeah.
He worked at Dole Fresh.
You've got garlic. You got lettuce. You know,
Lots of lettuce.
3 months.
Avocado.
All
is
except
big.
for 3 months out of the year. Most of our lettuce production happens there. Produce season, of course. Lots of.
So this is all Fresno
market, San Francisco
all right.
area.
Ooh, this one's a weird one.
Yeah.
But it's got to be produce season. But it's a
And
bit.
this is a refrigerated rate too.
Okay.
This is a
so you're
refrigerated.
just pulling reefer rate specifically.
Yeah.
Well, if
Salinas
we're talking
to Chicago.
if we're talking refrigerated freight, then you actually have a lot of cold protection issues because you have both, right? You have hot protection. I'm going to say there's two peaks in this one.
Okay.
My guess is on rates, and this is refrigerated. You probably have a Q1,
Yeah.
and then I think you have you have a summer peak. I think those are I think you have a dual peak here.
You're
What
pretty
say
much
you?
right. You're pretty much right.
I definitely get that
Yeah.
one. Look at that in the summer.
Fascinating thing. I think, the winter stuff, of course, you've got just that protect
Winter
from
is interesting
freeze.
because you do have peak rates.
Yeah. Just
so.
the tide kind of pulls the rest
Well,
of
you
the
also
market
have less
up.
capacity on the roads in January.
Yep.
And you have a lot of seasonal. I mean, it's really a summer peak.
But a lot of
Look at
people
it.
talking about produce season this year
What I'm
not being as
surprised by,
big.
though, I will say this: I'm a little surprised at how strong the third quarter is, or has been relative to the first quarter.
Nobody talks about the second harvest in California, but it happens. And again, you got Christmas trees happening in the Northwest that kind of
and you also just have a capacity to pull it out of the market. Well, this was a fun game.
Yeah.
This is a data live in SONAR, and you can play your own version with your friends at home by using the SONAR seasonal dashboard. It's in the chart window. Go to lanes. It's really cool. It's a new feature. We just put the chart any lane. You could take any address. Basically, you need a 5-digit zip code, right?
Yeah, or you just name
Or
the
just
city.
name a city.
Name a city.
So you can use a zip code, 5-digit zip code, or a city. Pull it up. Pull up a seasonal rate. Play at home.
Yeah.
Confuse your friends. Ask them who knows the seasonality.
Right.
What was my score?
I don't know.
8 out of 12 or something?
Maybe somebody will chime in the back and tell us.
I think I was 7 to 8. Some of those were a little contested.
I think you did pretty good. I think you did pretty good overall, pretty well. I mean, I don't know that I would have done any better. I think some of these were pretty surprising.
Laredo and Houston are a little drunk.
Man, Texas freight markets need to.
They're all over the place.
Maybe take a timeout. But yeah, I think there was a lot to be gleaned from looking at those rates too. You've got the West Coast
It
right
is
now.
interesting how
Not super
predictable,
active.
though. I was looking at Atlanta to Chicago this morning, or Chicago Atlanta. One of the two, probably the same. But just how consistently they trade within these bands, and I think you don't see it until you see seasonal chart.
Yeah.
You see it, but it's a great feature. Honestly, it's one of my newest favorite features. So.
All right. Well, let's. We've got some other additions too that we added in there. So we talked about the Trade War Command Center.
That's amazing. It's
last
another
time.
example. Our product team is cooking with gas. This is cool.
Yeah.
So the Trade War Command Center is something that's out there. Can we show this on screen? There it is.
There we go.
So it is a brand new, or it's been around for about a month.
Yep.
We've had it in there after the trade war was a lot of chaos, if you will. Really came out in, I think, early May, and it's really a chance to look at and interpret what's happening in the global market, particularly around this trade war, with one screen, so it has all the information. I remember getting all these phone calls from people saying, "What is going on?" And I was having problems. We had all this data, but just digging it out and be able to answer 10 questions. And this meant to bring all the data together. So what's cool about it, so you got ocean volume, you've got intermodal, you got truckload volume, and all the country data. Also shows the difference between bookings and cleared. You can find out stuff that's being booked. Remember, it's a couple weeks before. It ends up going, about a week before it ends up on the ship, and then a couple weeks before it clears customs. So it gives you a chance to sort of have leading indicators. I think, Zach, one of the really interesting things, you got departed. I was going to look at booked, but one of the interesting things here is just the intensity around Thailand and Vietnam as the primary beneficiaries. These countries, for those that may not know their geography offhand, these countries, Thailand and Vietnam, basically are next to China, and they have benefited from a lot of this freight that's would have been Chinese origin. So a lot of it is transshipped. And enormously, I had a friend that was over in Vietnam, and they were visiting these facilities, and they said that, they were looking at containers coming from China that actually had made in Vietnam. It had come from China, but the boxes said made in Vietnam. A lot of transshipping is going on. It's nearly impossible to know how much that is. It could be as much as 70. One of the banks, I think it was Goldman Sachs, said as much as 70%. They estimate as much as 70% of the Vietnamese freight was transshipped. I've seen as low as 30%. I don't know that anyone knows.
I think the big quick read here on the dashboard that I look at is that, you've got ocean volumes that are now above where they were last year. And if you recall, last year was a strong year for import activity. So the fact that we've now regrown, if you look at the bottom left down there with the IOTI,
the IOTI is
you can see the
legit.
air pocket created by the prohibitory tariffs on China that we've now cleared and now recovered.
We are
back above.
nearly back to sort of peak levels that we had during the peak of COVID.
And we got peak season for shipping coming up from that time here in the next month and a half.
And so the interesting thing is on the trade war is it has become sort of I wouldn't say an afterthought, because if you're an importer, you're still dealing with it. But I think as it relates to news, the administration seems to have largely moved on.
Well, we've got the deadlines coming up.
We do have the deadlines coming on. My guess is they end up just extending them out, because it's I think we had a lot. I think my guess, and I don't know how the administration thinks, but necessarily, but my guess is they were far less popular. It played to the base really well. His core MAGA, diehard MAGA base. But I think it was far less popular among the independents and also obviously the bond market than I think what the administration expected it to be. And I think what's happened is they've largely moved on from trade. We're not getting a lot of news. Right now, I think the administration is sort of basking in the glory of dropping a couple of bombs on some Iranian nuclear plants, and that did not turn into a catastrophe the way it could have, or a way some folks may have thought it would have. And I think it seems to be that's where the administration is focused on, is sort of moving on from trade. And I think that's a positive for everybody.
I think the uncertainty in the trade policy needs to get kind of cleared up for us to economically move forward a little bit. But, we did add some other things into, we do have a policy with China, or a framework with China. It's not official, but we do have a framework that was negotiated in London a couple of weeks ago. And, I think it was Lutnick came out and said, this is the worst, this is the highest level of tariffs that we'll see. And basically things aren't going to get worse. They're not going to change. Basically, this is the framework, and that up to 55% tariffs, but it's in certain class. It's really 35%, unless it's steel, and it's like 20, 55%. 25, I think, and then I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts.
There's a lot of tariffs.
I've tried to research it, and my head gets crosswired.
It's hard. We had a couple of days ago, there was actually a primer on FreightWaves.com that was like the latest. Because it is hard to keep track. It's like anyone who's dealt with a lot of numbers, is they sort of get.
Well, I've had some charts that kind of lead you Is it from Mexico? Is it steel? Is
There
it
is
this?
you have to have, this is where an
301.
AI bot will be your best friend, because at least you can figure out what's the latest.
Yeah, I think I even confused ChatGPT with it. But we did, for those of you that are interested in freight, we did add the European Command Center portion to the trade war dashboard.
And this is European bound freight?
European freight. So anything coming from Europe, you can similar information, but more European focused in the trade lanes and the IOTIs.
There's a lot of outbound out of Europe. They're supposed to put the inbound. I don't think that's up there yet, but inbound
is at the.
Can you flip these yet?
I think you can.
Okay, because that was a request that I asked. And what I like is basically just the one single dashboard. This is really the future of Sonar, showing stuff in a dashboard.
So Europe, they're coming up on their deadline for the trade war, and then
Go back to that right there, that top left corner. Europe to U.S., just showing how things have changed. I do think what's interesting, Zach, is year over year, if you didn't know there was a trade war, other than if you took out that April, May time period, and I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know it from the data.
No.
It feels, even at 10%, it's almost inconsequential at this point. And even if you look at the year over year data, I mean, look at, Europe to the U.S. year over year is 1.3%.
Down.
Week over week is up, but it moves in these bands.
Yeah. It's. I mean,
I think this is good.
Yeah.
This is great news.
In terms of,
you can't notice, the data doesn't tell you anything's going on, but it's relatively boring with the exception of April and May. And thank God, I'm tired of talking about it, because that's all we've talked about this year. Is I'm glad, at least for now, we don't have to have a conversation much about it.
Yeah, and then we added the Middle Eastern region into that dashboard as well, which, of course, there's not a ton of containerized freight.
No, but you do get a lot of concern around what was going to happen if the Strait of Hormuz was closed, what was going to happen with the Red Sea. Not a ton of freight headed to the U.S. Out of Turkey, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. And remember, this is containerized freight.
Yeah.
It does not include any of the bulk freights. People look at that and say, well, what about oil?
A lot of that's tank.
That is all bulk.
Yeah.
So,
but that is available in the trade war dashboard.
What's going on in Egypt, though? They got a lot of, they're really growing their market share.
I am not an Egypt market.
But look at how tiny it is in terms of its index. It's 4.23.
I mean, and this is indexed to the world.
Almost nothing's coming out of Saudi Arabia at 1.26.
I mean, they're not known for their factories and their production.
No.
They got one.
Probably some cotton.
Main commodity.
Getting cotton.
Yeah, one main commodity comes out of that region.
Well, true, but Egyptian cotton, man.
Yeah.
Your wife pick out the sheets. It's the Egyptian cotton.
I am a little particular about my sheets, so I have some.
I am as well. Egyptian cotton's great.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of the Middle East, though, I think we should talk about. I think this is one thing that I've been asked about a lot this week specifically, is because of the situation in the Middle East with Iran, oil prices. And, this, of course, has a pretty big downstream influence on freight in the way that it influences the cost, but it also influences things like inflation and how that manifests. And whereas we had this kind of run up in the cost of diesel and oil, then it kind of went away. Like, I think people woke up Monday morning expecting the oil markets to explode, and then
but they got their ass kicked.
Yeah.
The Iranians totally got wiped clean by the Israelis. And I think what's interesting about that is that I think Iran had enough, especially after the U.S. dropped. And regardless of whether, there's been all these mixed reports about whether we actually blew up the Iranian nuclear capability framework or whether we just settled back by a couple of months. It doesn't matter. The fact is, I think Iran, looking at the potential of losing power and having a lot more civil unrest, realized...
Well, they're already a country that is on the brink.
Yeah.
I mean, civil unrest is...
Economic issues, a lot of civil unrest. It's got a high youth unemployment, and a lot of tension. And I think the fact is they just had enough, and they threw in the towel. And it's good for and so I think this is why fuel prices have come down. I mean, the world is awash in oil. The other thing to keep in mind is that the tariffs we'll talk. I mean, at some point, I'm sure we'll talk about inflation. The inflationary have the tariffs caused inflation. One of the things that I think is underappreciated about the trade war is that it has destroyed a lot of global demand and global production, which does drive oil, particularly the Chinese economy itself, but even just around the world. And in doing so, it created U.S. uncertainty, which has slowed our economy. Now you've seen that in the economic data. But you also created the Fed has kept interest rates higher.
Yep.
But it's also, and perhaps even more so, has really destroyed a lot of global production. And in doing so, that means that oil, particularly with the Chinese, are not consuming as much oil.
Yep.
And in doing so, it means that oil prices are there. Plus, the U.S. Continues to just.
It's supply and demand, man.
It's such a different than when you and I are the same age. I think maybe slightly like 2 months older or something. But what's interesting about it is that
7
7 months old. You're August? Is it August?
October. Yeah.
October. For those that don't know, Zach and I went to high school together. So he taught me everything I know about school.
Not everything.
What I think is interesting is so much of our ability to not get embroiled in conflict is the fact that we have this U.S. fracking revolution, which has enabled us to basically get in and get out because we're not worried about oil supplies. And I think Iran knew that because the only folks that they would have choked off would have been China. And I actually think in some ways the U.S. would have benefited from that because of if you're from a security standpoint, because it would have negatively impacted the Chinese far more than the Americans. And actually, WTI would have likely gone up because it does compete against Brent. U.S. oil prices would have gone up, and oil prices would have gone up, and in doing so, that would actually be a net positive for U.S. oil producers. So, I think Iran made the calculation that they've lost the middle. Like, I think it's what we're seeing a lot of the, like Saudi Arabia. It's starting to sort of democratize its economy or capitalistic economy. It's creating more freedoms because I think they realize that the amount of, they used to have power by chokeholding the world with oil. They've lost a lot of that. And that's frankly because of US and Canadian fracking.
And it's almost like a nothing story to the freight market at this point, right?
And I think it's shocking. I mean, I called Will, our head of product at SONAR, and that's why we have a Middle Eastern dashboard. Because I'm like, this may get hot just in case, because it's going to be, I've already got a lot of questions. And it's a nothing burger in terms of impact.
So let's talk.
It never was going to, to be clear, it would unlikely to impact the container market. I think what people were really concerned about was oil movement, and what does that mean for if things got out of hand. And look,
and the Red Sea.
To the U.S. pilots, who, I mean, I think we had 9 B-2, I think 12 total B-2 bombers were involved in this. 2 of them were diversions.
They were off being decoys.
The decoys. 9 of them went over there. It's pretty remarkable that we were able to go in, clean up, and we actually we found this out actually through Trump's tweets or Truth Social posts before it became public knowledge, even on things like X. There was a dude on X. I don't know if you saw this. There's a guy on X that goes, I counted 9. It was the night before. I counted 9 B-2 bombers over my house. Something's going on. And he was just some rando that just like tweeted this out. Nobody saw it.
What a
They probably thought he's just
like
some
guy.
Some guy. So.
Well, let's switch gears real quick back to the freight market a little bit and the demand and economic stuff. OTVI underperforming largely year over year now for the entirety of the year, pretty much.
It sucks. And I think this is a reflection of, I do think the broader economy has been slowing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've seen it not just in freight data. You can see the gap between the green is last year and white is this year. But even in our advertising business, in our, we have these lifestyle publications. We've also had this aircraft finance business. We've seen a sharp slowdown in activity in those markets. I think that even the luxury market is starting to sustain. And I don't know if you've seen this, but this is the start of the sort of peak selling, talk about peak seasons for selling. A lot of real estate, the real estate market is slowing in a lot of cities. We've seen pricing deflation in the housing market in some cities because they're not able to move their houses because there just aren't enough buyers.
Yeah, and normally with the OTVI, what we would have seen in a traditional seasonal period, the last couple of years maybe not the most reflective. Last year was fairly a seasonal curve that we would normally see with a big hump in the middle. That seems to be largely absent this year.
It is. We have not had much of a summer run. I do think what's interesting, let's pull up OTRI here, because I want to talk a little bit about what's happening here. The tender rejection data is really interesting. Look at that peak. That, my friend, I didn't see this. That, my friend, could be the ELP. Now, it's also could be July 4th run up, some of that. But do you know what's happening yesterday?
Tell me.
The English proficiency requirement went into effect yesterday.
You don't think this is July 4th?
It's the July 4th, but I
Okay.
also, looking for data,
Yeah.
I mean, it does follow a historical pattern, but I think what's interesting is, does this English mandate, the fact that there is a test? By the way, I want to tease something for those that are tuning in live on Thursday, is that the DOT secretary is actually going to be on What the Truck tomorrow. He apparently has something he wants to talk about. He has not told us what it is, but some new policy or some new order that they're going to talk about tomorrow related to this particular issue.
Right.
This English issue. So tune in tomorrow at noon to find out what it is. I will as well, because it's pretty cool that he showed Dooner's so excited, but that's at noon tomorrow. But what's interesting about this is the ELP mandate's coming into effect, and it basically is the English language proficiency exam, where the DOT has instructed the states, the state examiners, the weigh station officers, the state troopers, that they have an English proficiency. If they suspect, it's subjective, but if they suspect that a driver is not proficient in English, that they have a test. And this test basically is something that the officers can give a driver. And if a driver fails to demonstrate proficiency, he can put out of service. And I'll tell you why this matters, Zach, is for those that don't understand the trucking industry very well, or understand the importance of your out-of-service incidents or your safer scores, is that this information, when you have out-of-service violations, it ends up showing up in your record. It's like having a speeding ticket but worse, because you're you're put out of commission, right?
Right.
And so if you're a fleet and you have a out-of-service violation, this stuff is recorded on your record. And what's interesting about that is that shows up in your insurance rates. It also shows shippers will not book you if you have a lot of out-of-service violations. So if we start seeing a lot of fleets put out of service on a frequent basis, then we may end up in a situation where, and so if you're a big trucking fleet, if you're one of the big sort of enterprise fleets or mega carriers, as people like to call them, and you've been hiring people who aren't English proficient, you have to now make a different decision, because if you hire those folks who aren't proficient in English, a couple things could happen. You could get an out-of-service violation. It's on your record. That really matters to insurance companies. You could end up, your freight could be stranded in transit. Well, then now you have a security problem.
Right.
The driver can't haul the freight. What happens if it's a load of electronics? So a lot of issues here that I actually think this may be the biggest impact to the domestic freight market that we've seen in some time. I'm not going to say whether the market is out of a recession, because I'm going to get a lot of heat if I did. But I would say this is
I'll defend you on that note for sure, because I agreed with your call at that point. And this is why. You look at the rejection rate for the last 12 months. This market was on the cusp of flipping. It absolutely was. You look at rejection rate trends. I tend to look at the July 4th to Christmas peaks, and we were totally trending towards a market inflection point. And this year, we even had the winter weather stuff. Everything was on schedule, and the demand erosion and some other things have occurred that has reversed the cadence. We're now reversed.
This is just the uncertainty with trade. And I think the fact that we've had this really, and it wasn't just trade. Remember, we had the Doge stuff that happened early in the administration. It just felt like a lot of noise.
A lot of noise.
Exactly the term I'd be looking for.
Yeah.
And I think that made a lot of the business leaders that are connected in the goods economy. I've talked to people that are in real estate, and they said one of the big issues, and capital spending has been put on hold because people are afraid to make long-term decisions with 100%. So much uncertainty. I hope that the administration is decided to move on to other things and not trade, and is comfortable with the level of tariffs. And even if they roll them, I think we're okay, because at least it's not this constant noise. Because I think the Americans just want to get back to doing business.
We just want to do our jobs at this point, I think, for the most part. There's the people I talk to are largely all asking the same question. It's like, what's going on? And I think everybody's stuck in this holding pattern, as we were waiting.
We had a lot of change in the
For the freight market perspective, I'm hearing a lot about these short-term projects. Short haul freight has been doing just fine. A lot of upstream activity, a lot of quick downstream, and I think another conversation I had was whether or not this was going to lead to kind of this expedited situation where People wait till the last minute to place an order because they're uncertain of demand because they can't make long-term plans.
I don't know if you have it, but the inventory numbers, the LMI.
Of course, I don't have that one today, but it's in the trade board dashboard.
Can we pull up the trade board dashboard? Because I think it's interesting in terms of the LMI index. Because the LMI index, if you zoom in on, I don't know if the team back there can zoom in or we could talk about it, but in that second quadrant, those dials, they look like speedometers.
We can test something out.
If you zoom in on that, you can actually see inventory levels. And basically what's happening is warehouse capacity has been going down. Inventory levels have been going down. They're above, so they've been building, but they have been coming down. And I think what's really interesting about what is happening is that a lot of the pre-build because of the tariffs is still in the economy, by that pre-stocking, and a lot of that will, I think, go away.
There's your LMI right there that people are looking at.
Yeah, so it is on the decline. It's been going up really since last July, or July, sorry, of 2023. But it is hopefully, if there is a level of just comfort that the administration's done with trade reconfiguration, then I think we could see companies get back to getting on. And I do think we're at a point where people are ready. But the issue is then the broader economy. And that's the thing you have to be concerned about. We haven't seen inflation related to tariffs. Everybody can pull up situational price discovery. I think one of the things is housing needs to come back. Housing's in a real big crisis because of higher interest rates. Housing drives as much as 20% of truckload freight, both direct and indirect. That's things like furniture is an indirect.
People aren't moving around.
Lumber is a direct, people aren't moving. Housing market's stale because of the fact that people have low mortgage rates are not willing to move. It is interesting because companies are now mandating in office, even locally. TVA, a federal agency, has mandated people come back. Unum this past, I think it was 2 days ago, announced that all 2,900 employees in Chattanooga are coming back to the office. I think these in-office mandates are going to be interesting because it's going to be harder and harder for people to stay in their homes if they want to get a new job. One of the other things interesting is the youth unemployment levels. As a college graduate, it's one of the hardest job markets. And I think what's happening also is companies don't have confidence in the economy. And the types of jobs that some of these AI and language learning models are being used for is typically entry-level jobs. So people are finding more efficient ways to do things. That's going to be an impact on that housing market as well, because if people don't have confidence in the job market, they're not going to be buying. And the most important consumers are the ones that buy goods are in the very jobs that are most likely impacted, these entry-level jobs, because those are the people in the high levels of consumption. You know, you and I are older. We still have young kids, but we are well past the early days of, like, I'm unlikely to buy another house. You're unlikely to buy another house in your life, and maybe at some point, but until your kids get out of school. And therefore, we're not consuming as much as people that are
we're not the big consumption.
We're in the wealth building phases of our life, not the consumption parts of our life.
And I think too with the consumers, a lot of those consumers uncertain about their own well-being.
Now this does, I think long term, we haven't talked about this because it's the first time I've ever brought it up, but it does interesting long term is what happens if a lot of those entry-level white-collar jobs go away, and I'm convinced they will with stuff I've seen with some of these language learning models. There will be new jobs created, but some of these jobs I think will be more challenging. Some of these entry-level jobs will be
100%.
And I think it will be a drag on freight markets long term because you have this secular move of people in their prime earnings and good consumptions that won't do it. So that's a different story.
We could spend a whole nother webinar on AI if we wanted to, but we got about 13-ish minutes left. I want to make sure we leave time for some Q&A. We had a big game at the beginning that probably cut into some of this time, but I want to get to that. So I'll toss it back over to Julia.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and take all of those questions. If you do have any more questions that you want to ask, go ahead and type those in. I've got a great couple to go through here. The first question is from Michael, who asks, what are your expectations in terms of the industrial economy and the LTL market for the second half of the year?
I have been asked this question a few times in LTL. You're an LTL guy. I'll let you start.
I'm not. I've always kind of thought that LTL was going to come out in a much better position through all this, just because the industrial sector's dying to wake up and ready to go. But I think I think it will move more hand in hand with the truckload environment. I think the truckload market will flip, and that will
Wait, do you think we're flipping right now?
I think we are so close to a flip.
I think capacity is the question.
Capacity falling out of the space, and this extension of downturn, what's going to happen is the truckload market is going to have an inflection point, pretty unpredictable one, more than likely. And then that's going to basically trigger a landslide downstream into LTL.
I would say that if we do see a flip, it's probably going to be in September, October. And the reason I say that in truckload is that I think the summer, this ELP mandate, some of the other issues that exist in terms of pressure, we haven't talked about student loan now issues that are coming out, the buy now, pay later issues now showing up on credit reports. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the background that's going to actually slow some of the consumer activity. But I do think we come out of this in the second, in the third quarter, where some of the capacity reductions exist.
I mean, the momentum behind capacity reduction is so strong.
We haven't been in an expansionary cycle for some time. And so I think that is what I would look for. I think that is definitely the bigger question here.
And the industrial side of things, we need economic certainty or clarity for that to get going.
We absolutely do. I do think, you know, we've got a big, beautiful bill. There's a lot of questions about whether that gets passed. We get through that, there will be some tax concessions. It feels inevitably that there's going to be some level of significant tax concessions. I think that could drive the second half, you know, probably move into the third quarter as people start thinking about next year. And it could be nice bullishness for 2026. I think, frankly, this Middle Eastern thing is not a short-term story. But I think the fact that for now, you know, a lot of people have forgotten that Israel's been at war for really 18 months now. It was October 7th of 2023. And
feels like forever ago.
And now there is a level. I wouldn't say there's peace, but there is a level of
de-escalation.
De-escalation is probably the right term.
Great. My next question here is from Peter, who asks, what are your thoughts on electrification in terms of HGV, EV capacity, availability for spot cargo, demand developments for zero carbon moves, and pricing versus diesel?
I mean, look, I think the biggest thing you can take from this big, beautiful bill is that the administration is very anti-EVs. In fact, they've pulled back a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Even some of the solar incentives that were there for the power grid and clean energy incentives for the power grid, except for nuclear being the only sort of winner of this. It means that the electrification, the pressure to electrify is somewhat off because fleets no longer feel that this is a necessary thing that they have to contend with. There was so much money available for the OEMs to go grab to electrify it. And I remember there was the CEO of Volkswagen, who happens to be in Chattanooga, North America, the North America leader, made a comment. He's like, you may not want an electric vehicle, but you're getting one because there's $8 billion of incentives in line for us. That was a pretty tough, this was 2 years ago. And if you look at the new bill, that is definitely directionally changing.
I mean, it was already going to be, I mean, some of the targets were already kind of not realistic to begin with, but I mean, obviously this administration is not going to continue.
Very anti anything that's ESG.
Great. My next question is from Todd, who asks, historically, shippers have tried to lock in contract pricing at low levels prior to a market uptick. What are we seeing in contract rate pricing? And are there any indicators that shippers might be trying to lock in higher and more sustainable contract rates?
Echo did a great survey. We posted it on FreightWaves. I don't know if you saw this. It was a 4,000 shipper survey they went out to. This was maybe
I did the webinar.
Ago. You did, you did it. Okay, you did it. Why don't you tell us that? Because I was still in your thunder.
Shippers were largely right about their predictions for the year thus far.
Which they didn't think there was going to be increases.
And again, you have to think a lot of the shipping community is probably better at doing this because they kind of forecast what drives a lot of this stuff. And from a demand perspective, so not a lot of them were expecting a huge market turn. Some of the LMI results I think are fascinating because I think they have this prediction of a much further out
change in
market conditions into next year.
In fairness, can I, other than,
Yeah,
and
go
not
ahead.
stealing the Echo, or disagreeing with the Echo survey data, if you remember back in 2020, during the COVID, it was July and August, and I'll never forget this because we had gone super bullish as early as May. And we were talking about a very, very, very significant recovery in freight and predicting. I remember I tweeted this and somebody came out, it was a shipper came out and we had this public debate. And then one of our competing media businesses came out and was like suggesting that I was trying to manipulate the rates, but this had the point. There was a point where shippers were sort of caught off guard by the level of speed and the changes in the market. Now, we don't have the super high demand that we had back in 2020. There is no surplus of demand, but you could be on the other side of capacity if we see large levels of enforcement and the numbers are as big as we believe that they are in terms of non-English proficiency. Then I think you could be in a scenario where you do see a real nice short squeeze in rates.
This will be,
and I think shippers will be very, very
taken off
apt
guard
to do it. The other thing is, I think some shippers, Amazon has already put out guidance to their carrier base about English proficiency and guiding their contract carriers to under Relay to make sure that they have done this. The drivers that they hire the drivers that are working inside their network could pass the test. I think we'll see scenarios where shippers start to, because they don't want disruptions to their freight and are intolerant, because these scenarios where shippers are mandating English proficiency just on their freight. And that could actually be a bifurcated market between fleets that have compliance and fleets that don't.
We've actually seen contract rates kind of nudge lower, not a lot.
Well, it's just a trade to the bottom.
But they're already on the floor, and it's I don't.
They're not going to get cheaper.
No, they're not going to get a lot cheaper, if at all. I think a lot of those cost-saving initiatives have largely passed through the system on the transportation side. What I think will be possible, though, is that it's going to take some sort of event for you to see rates increase significantly at this point. I think everybody's going to be very reactive.
I mean, as John Kingston, our oil reporter, likes to remind you, is that the squeezes actually happen. In commodity markets, squeezes happen on the upside. The market is much more likely to increase faster than it is to decrease.
Right.
That's at least what he would say in the energy markets. That's what he would say in a lot of these commodity markets, is that you tend to see the squeezes on the upside faster, that rates actually go higher faster.
For sure they do.
They go down, then they go down. We will see what we end up getting.
Yeah, and I think the coil has been wound pretty tight at this point.
Yeah.
Next question here is from Jordan, who asks, how do you think AI is going to change the freight brokerage and intermediary industry?
AI is, by the way, we have an AI summit coming up on July 30th at the International Spy Museum. Shout out to FreightWaves. You know this, right?
I didn't know
We
where
have
it was.
an AI symposium.
I knew
it's a
that.
one-day event in Washington, D.C. at the International Spy Museum.
I didn't know it was at the Spy Museum.
It's going to be cool. So you'll hopefully be there.
That's a little annoying.
It's cool. It's like a bunch of spies. Anyways, but we are doing an AI symposium. Like, I'm very bullish on AI. And I think just the stuff that it's happening so quickly, and the innovations that are happening so quickly, I am starting to use it in so much things that I do. Everything from copy editing to ideation to research. You got to be careful because it does hallucinate quite a bit, and sometimes you have to fact check.
That's on purpose.
One of the big tricks is having to fact check the AI through AI.
Yeah.
And say, show me the original source. But I do think it is getting to the point where I know we have seen it in certain jobs, particularly these entry-level jobs we talked about that young people are taking. In certain jobs, it's going to be easier to have AI to do those jobs than to have humans do those jobs. And I think it's just going to become better and better. And a copy editor is one of the best use cases I can find inside of our own experience. is basically taking a piece of copy and running it through an AI. It actually, in some ways, does better. If anyone who's ever followed my X account knows that I'm not very good with grammar. Sometimes spelling, I miss words. And what I have found is if I run it through like Grok to copy edit it, it tends to be a little bit better than I am myself. And even in some cases, outshine even human copy editors.
Right. Yeah, and I think in the brokerage sector, I mean, you're talking about, these are going to be the repetitive tasks that are the most exposed at first to having AI integrations to do a lot of these things. It's not going to be the complicated portion.
I was talking to our general counsel
Yeah.
Just a few minutes ago before we got on here, and he's using it for contract management. And he's like, it's got this AI engine. You upload and it tells you everything you need to know about that contract, all built into it. It's gone and scanned the document and knows the termination date. And those are the types of things like in business processing.
Yep.
Document processing, I think it's huge. I was at a
Carrier
company,
vetting.
I was at a large company that's in business processing the last couple of weeks at their headquarters, and they're doing a ton of AI stuff. And they're using AI throughout their organization because it's helping them do a lot of document intelligence of really doing it, whereas before they had a lot of humans that would go through and have to mine these fields, and that's just what makes it really powerful. And so I think there's going to be a ton of use cases. And one thing I will say, we talked about the youth. I talked about the youth unemployment, and I've seen this from my son is 18. He's now going to college. One of the things I have found, even at Firecrown and FreightWaves, is that it's easier to hire a college kid who knows how to use AI, cheated their way through school, than it is, frankly, some of the older folks that maybe have sort of biased themselves against the technology or don't understand it or haven't used it. And in some ways, it's easier to bring in because they're naturally adapted. I think it's going to be this interesting sort of environment where you have people who are naturally digital native and AI natives are going to have enormous amount of job prospects because every business wants them, essentially prompt engineers that are going to put some of those other entry-level jobs are going to displace it. So that's, the prompt engineers are definitely, in some ways, going to beat out some of the other sort of engineering talent that could be out there.
And it's still moving very fast.
It's so fast, and so many cool things.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, looks like that is all of the time that we have for today. Craig and Zach, as always, thanks for a great conversation. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, truckstop.com, for partnering with us on our webinar today. And as always, thank you, our audience, for participating and asking so many great questions. Before we break, I do want to remind everyone of a couple of the FreightWaves events that we have on deck. As Craig mentioned, our next event is going to be our Supply Chain AI Symposium, held July 30th at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Also mark your calendars for October 21st and 22nd for F3, the Future of Freight Festival, right here in Chattanooga. It's guaranteed to be the largest festival in freight. You can get a special discounted combo to attend both of these events, but that deal ends on Monday, June 30th. Head over to live.freightwaves.com to learn more. Thanks again, everyone.